This is something I never have really spoken about publicly, but I feel like it's time to share, especially in this past week where I've been talking about what it means to be an Indian woman raised in America, what it means to be in menopause and an Indian woman, all of those things. I want to talk about something deeply personal as an Indian woman, and that's my journey of not having kids. I know there are so many women out there who carry this silently, and I want you to know that you're not alone. And for years, I've felt the weight of cultural expectations, and I want to start this conversation. So, part of, everybody who's here on YouTube is here sharing from their perspective and their lived experience. And part of unmuting and finding your voice, which is what I help women do, is actually showing up authentically. And when I do my videos, I'm editing, I'm taking out the ums and the ahs where I've stumbled on words. And that's, I have a script that I'm following. I've created the script and I have an outline, so I know what to talk about and I don't stray from that. But this is me showing up completely authentic. So you might hear a lot of ums, you might hear tears through or see tears, me talking about the fact that I didn't have kids. You might hear me stuttering and stumbling over my words, but this is me. So, yeah, kids. So, yes, there is the years of cultural expectations that I was going to have kids. Back from when I was little, I was always talking about other family members, like when you have kids, when you have kids. But as far back as I can remember, before that conditioning I ever remember that conditioning, I remember saying at 5 years old, I can't wait to have my own kids. I had this feeling, my uncles are twins, and I was too young to even understand that there's a twin gene and it skips a generation, but I was saying at 5, I'm the one who's going to have the twins. And everything up until mid 40s was all based around having kids, wanting kids, right? There's the cultural part, and then, yes, the part that I actually wanted kids too. So here I'm going into one dysfunctional relationship after another. But I was in my 20s. I said, I have time. And that dream of having kids was always there, but I would pick these people that I was like, I do not want to have children with you, but I would stay with them. But like I said, I was in an age range where I said, yeah, I still have time. Then I got into my 30s, and that urgency, that biological, I want kids so badly, I was starting to feel that even more. We talked about this in the other episodes around what happens with your body every month during your period, and you're prepping for this, and you get into your 30s, and now you're really prepping for this. And it was another dysfunctional relationship after another. And then I would get, break up from that relationship and then find myself again. And then think, okay, this is it. I found myself. I'm good. And then another dysfunctional relationship. And each time those people, it was like, definitely, I'm not going to have kids with you. Then let's talk about, I'm getting into my 40s now. And I get into this relationship. And I'm going to say that was around 2017. And I was in that relationship from 2017 to end of 2021. So 5 years of my life. Now I'm in my 40s, and that pang, that internal pang to have kids is so strong. And here I'm with a person never deserved me. We're not even going to get into what happened in that relationship. I'll talk about more of the things that can support women in other episodes. And I have talked about that how to deal with a narcissist. But I was trying to make this person fit into my life and fit into this vision of having kids. This person had already had kids and had kids with multiple people. So they kind of dangled it in front of me that they knew how to parent. They had done this. They had older kids and they had gone through the motions, but I didn't know. And there were family members too who were saying to me, when I would bring up about having kids, they would say, oh, you don't know how to handle kids. You don't know how to handle kids without me there. When have you dealt with kids? I have worked with children since I was a child. So since I was, I think when I was probably around 11 years old, I made, in my graphics design class in high school, I made a business card and it said my name, my phone number, and babysitter. We were using old letter stamps to make these business cards. And I gave them out to people in the neighborhood. And I babysat for my neighbor's child, who was the same age as me. She had cerebral palsy. And that was when I learned, I just had this passion for children. I loved babies. I always, once I was in high school or after high school and in college, I was working summer camps, working with children. So that passion was always there. And then, as I got older, I went into speech therapy and working with children again. And, the last 12 years of my career was in birth to 3. So here now I'm holding babies and really helping them to talk and seeing the joy and when a parent comes home with that baby. And so in my 40s, when I'm in this relationship, I started to see my window closing. And yes, it's very simple to say, well, get out of that relationship and find somebody that you can have kids with. Yeah, that sounds like that's what I should have done in the moment. And thinking back to it, yeah, that sounds like very easy. But when I was in it, it wasn't that easy. There's always something to hook me back in, constantly hooking me back in. And also playing along with my dream that they wanted to have kids with me. And this could work, even though they had other kids. And I went with that dream. And it messed me up even more. As I want to say probably around, when I was 43 or so. I can't grasp the ages right now and figure out the times, but it was probably a couple of years before COVID. So, we're approaching 2020. And I started to realize I hate Mother's Day. Every Mother's Day was so painful for me, especially as I entered 40. Everybody around me was getting Happy Mother's Day, Happy Mother's Day, Happy Mother's Day. They'd look at me, hey, how are you? And walk away. And then I had the friends who were saying, well, you've been a mother to all these children, so Happy Mother's Day to you too. Did that make me feel better? I don't know. I don't know if they did, or maybe the silence would have been better. I don't know in retrospect. People can't handle that awkward space, so they think they have to fill it in with something. At the same time, I'm on these conference calls and people are, oh, Priya, do you have, and I'm in an early childhood, in the early childhood field, and on these Zoom calls, especially around COVID, and people are getting to know each other on video, and people would ask, oh, Priya, do you have kids? And I said, no. And they would say, well, no, you didn't look like you did. So what the F is that supposed to mean? I don't look like I've had kids. And then you had the other people who are trying to fix that and say, oh, you don't need kids anyway. There's plenty to adopt. Or, no, you're better off without kids. You've got a lot of free time on your hands that now you can do the things that you want. I was hearing that left and right. And it was totally, I wish I could curse on this right now, but I don't have anything to bleep out the sounds. I just wanted to scream in those moments. And like I said, every Mother's Day, every year was tortuous. It was like, oh God, here we go again. And I couldn't wait till Mother's Day was over because it's a day celebration. People, say Happy Mother's Day and then that's it. Everything goes back to normal. People get gifts, people get cards, and everything goes back to normal. I didn't mind celebrating my mom for Mother's Day and saying Happy Mother's Day to her. But I remember saying Happy Mother's Day to her and she would say, thanks. And that would be the end of it. Like she stopped herself from saying anything to me. I can't describe to you, and or maybe you understand because you're watching this right now, the pain I felt, the absolute pain I felt in those moments where children were coming up to the surface, and the fact that, am I going to have children? This person that I'm with, I'm not going to have children with them. So how do I end this relationship so I can maybe possibly find somebody I'm going to have a child with? Then, as I said, COVID happened and I got a puppy, and I got my baby Azuki. She's 5 now, and I don't want to compare children to dogs, but I was definitely training her to be an indoor dog. And people said, oh, it's going to be easy, but they were keeping their dogs as outside dogs. I was potty training her. I was putting up with the crying at night, and, setting my alarm a couple of times a night once she was out of the crate so that I could take her out to potty train her. And I actually started to think, oh my gosh, yeah, is this what it's going to be like to have a child? Do I want this for myself? And there was that duality. Do I want this for myself? But what if I don't? These other women are going to be better than me. These people who have had children are going to be better than me. And I remember really breaking down, crying to this partner that I had at the time. Not a great partner. And yeah, he was a guy, but apparently he was trying to relate my biological urge to have a child in my womb. I could feel it. Like I wanted that child in my womb space. And he was trying to compare it to his desire to have children and could not hear a word I could say. He couldn't understand that maybe I was going through this process where I'm not going to have kids, and accepting the fact that maybe I don't want kids. That was the turning point, is when I started to accept maybe I don't want kids. And that was a challenge. That was a real challenge, because what happened to this dream that I've had since I was 5 years old, that I have the twin gene, I'm going to have these twins, or these dreams that I had about being with somebody and raising a child or 2 children together, seeing them grow up. What I finally started to understand was my fantasy, my dream about having children ended at a certain age. Then the thought of having to put them into schools, into systems. And I know that that's part of having children. Yeah, you have the responsibility. And I was starting to accept that maybe I just didn't want that. And it was okay. It was okay to accept that. But what I want to talk about here is this is what's never spoken about. The grief, the absolute grief that we, as women who have always wanted children, and then maybe have gotten to a point where we don't want them, we've decided we don't want them, we can't have them, get to, and the grief of it's how I described it to a friend was, I'm grieving the loss of a child I never had. It was like all those potentials, all those souls that could have potentially been born out of me. I was grieving the loss of that. I was not going to have children. I had my dog. My dog was beautiful, and I want to say that my dog taught me how to love. She taught me how to love her as if she's a child, and she gave me everything I need to feel that nurturing, that I'm nurturing someone, that I'm treating someone well, that I'm disciplining you, that I'm, loving on you. She gave me that. But it took a while. Like I said, I got her in 2020, now we're in 2025. It wasn't immediate. And I want to say that grief was a good more than 5 years. And I couldn't talk about it to anybody. I had maybe one friend who listened to me as I cried. I remember crying to her. And she said, yeah, Priya, it's real. That's a real grief. And that's all she said. She held that space for me as I tear up now talking about this, she held that space for me. Whereas meanwhile, the people around me were trying to console me and saying, no, you don't need them. Not, or you're not good enough. You don't know how to handle children. I remember when I was talking with this ex-boyfriend, the one that I was trying to make fit into my life, and I started to say, yeah, I do want to have kids. The response that I got from him was, would you even know what to do with them? And I wanted to say, do you even know what to do with yours? That's a whole other story. And now I don't want to get into his drama, but it's a real pain and it's not talked about. It's not talked about. What I've seen, how it's talked about is that when it comes to career, or, you're a high achieving career woman and not having kids. I wasn't high achieving. Like, I wasn't spending 80 hours a week at my job. I worked in a school, so I had school hours. I had the time. So it had nothing to do with the career. It had nothing to do with me being high achieving. It had everything to do with me coming to the terms with the fact that maybe my 5-year-old dream, maybe all that cultural expectation, or when you have kids, that you hear from so early on, that door was closing. And so I want to talk to you today because it's real, and I want to validate this for you. And like I said, I know there's so many women out there. If you're Indian, you know that there's that cultural pressure to have kids. I believe there was a family member who told my mother, I'm successful in what I do. I've been successful in what I do. Speech therapy, working for myself, always responsible, having my house. I'm successful. But that wasn't success enough in this family member's eyes. That person said to my mom, you failed in your duties with Priya. You didn't get her married off and she didn't have kids. And luckily, I have amazing parents who appreciate the empowered woman I've become. They understand that I am me. And it took a while, but they understand who I am. They understand that my dog is my baby. It took a while for my mom to even understand that I am my dog's mom. Like, she doesn't know anybody else. I am her caretaker. I am her person. So now when I go to their house and I hear my mom say, go to your mom, and she's talking to the dog, that warms my heart. But it doesn't cause the pain that it did when I was going through the grief. So I definitely want to talk to you about, like I said, I want to acknowledge, validate that this is grief. It's an unspoken grief. And you don't even have to have a reason that you didn't have children. If you did want children at one point and you decided you didn't, there's going to be a grieving process around that. Grief is not just the loss of a physical body or somebody in your life. It's also the loss of a dream. It's also the loss of a story you've told yourself, or something that you've convinced yourself it was going to be. In retrospect, thank goodness I did not have children with this person. Thank God. God protected me from that universe, whatever you want to call it. I was divinely protected. But people are going to try and relate to you in a way that they can't, because they're not going through it. Especially if a person has had children, they can't talk to you about it. Even my friends who had miscarriages, they couldn't relate to this. They couldn't relate to the fact that I was grieving something that I haven't even had. So that's why I say it's not talked about, because people talk about grief in this specific container and it has to look a certain way. And like I said, and I keep saying this over and over again, I want to validate for you that this grief is real. For me, it's been a mix of freedom, guilt, sometimes loneliness, that question of kids comes really early and it just never stops. You go to somebody's house when you're, the Indian get-togethers, and your worth is measured by if you're married and kids. And then your career and all of that stuff comes. Like I said, this is fully authentic, so stop that recording for a second while my dog could bark. But like I said, mix of freedom, guilt, loneliness, and I still question today, how would it have been if I had kids, if I was with the right person? But this is all I have. I'm in this present moment. This is where my life has taken me. And now I get to support others who have been in similar journeys with me. I started to realize probably just recently, probably even, in the past year or so, that my life is still full and meaningful without following the script, without having children. I've definitely supported a ton of children in my life, in my career. And even now, I get to be with my friends' kids and support my niece and nephew. I get to, just this past weekend, my niece was visiting before going off to college. I always had this dream of when I have my child, I'm going to talk to her before she goes to college about the things that I went through so that she's prepared. Because Indian family, we're not going to get prepared. They're just going to close their ears and say, I hope she's a good girl, especially with the girls, right? And I got to talk to my niece. We would go to the gym every day, and I said, all right, we're having this talk. And yes, and I said, don't worry if it's awkward. We need to have this talk. And I shared truths with her that I haven't even shared with other friends. And that opened up the dialogue that she was able to have this conversation with me and ask me questions. And I said, and just always talk to me about it. Always talk to me. And that dream came true for me. So even though it didn't come in the way of having my own child, birthing my own child, which I dreamt about too. I know that women talk about childbirth and how painful it is, and my friends and the labor that they've gone through. I dreamt of having a vaginal childbirth. How many people dream of that? And so even through those dreams, I was able to actually share that time and share that dream that I had envisioned that I was going to have with my daughter or my son before they went off to school. I was able to have that with my niece. So I want to leave you with this. If you've ever felt like something's wrong with you because you didn't follow that path, or, you chose not to have kids, or maybe life chose for you that you weren't going to have kids, I want you to know you're still whole. You're still amazing. And I want to hold you in the space of acknowledging any kind of grief, anything, any kind of emotion that you've held around this. I know I have friends who are definitive, like, oh God, I don't want kids. That's great. That's great. But if you're like me, where your whole life was built around this dream, I want you to know that I'm here to support you. So thank you for letting me share this. And like I said, if this resonates with you, just know that you're not alone. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Click on the links below and reach out to me, and I'm here to support you. I remember getting my period at around 12 years old. I was probably in 6th or 7th grade. And that day, at the end of the day, my dad came home from work and my mom and dad took me to the store. They bought me a new outfit. It was a celebration of this coming of age. And I've talked about my experience growing up Indian in this country. Within my home, I was in this conservative, probably very controlled Indian environment. When I walked out that door, I was in America, and that created a lot of conflict. But as far as my period went, I never experienced any of the constructs that I'm about to explain. Then in high school, we visited India for the first time in years. I think it was the first time since 1975, and now we're talking about 1990s. And we got there, and then all of a sudden I felt the constriction. I was being told, hey, if you have your period, you're not allowed in the kitchen. If you have your period, you're not allowed to do this. You're not allowed to do that. You can't touch this. You can't go to the temple. All of these rules around having my period. And then I asked my mom about this, and she told me that, yeah, when she was growing up, for 3 days every month, she couldn't be in the house. She had to stay almost in a little, I don't want to call it an outhouse, but it was separate from the main house. And that's where she had to spend her 3 days. She couldn't come into the kitchen. She couldn't go to the temple. And I started to feel like, oh, okay, well, maybe having my period is dirty. It's shameful. Now, 30 years later, as that same body here prepares to stop the bleeding as far as entering perimenopause and menopause, I'm finally understanding something, that menopause isn't just the end of fertility. And it's the end of a lifetime, an end of an era of apologizing for taking up space. And I've talked about this in other episodes as well. When your body stops performing its primary function, according to patriarchal society, you finally get to discover who you are when you're not being useful to everyone else. Now, if you've ever wondered why women in their 40s and 50s suddenly start speaking their truth, this is for you. And if you're Asian Indian, even more specifically South Indian, this episode is for you. Hey, beautiful souls. I'm Priya, and I help women 40 plus who are in perimenopause and menopause find their voice and step into their power. And today we're doing a deep dive into something that affects literally half the population, but we're taught to whisper about it. Menopause. You know, have other episodes on menopause. And it's a time in our life where we're prepping. We're prepping for the worst. We're not just talking about hot flashes and hormones. We're talking about menopause as a biological revolution. As your body's rebellion against a lifetime of cultural conditioning has taught you to be small, quiet, and convenient, you start breaking out of that. You start questioning things. You start saying, hey, this is what I was raised to believe, and it doesn't resonate with me. What I want to do today is talk about how patriarchal societies, specifically what I can relate to, Indian patriarchal society, where it's used women's biology against us from the moment we start bleeding. Yeah, let's get blunt, from the time that we start bleeding. And how menopause becomes this unexpected gift and the chance to finally stop apologizing for existing. So whether you're in perimenopause, menopause, or just curious about why your mom started telling people exactly what she thinks, which is what happened in my case, stay with me. So to understand why menopause is so revolutionary, we need to start at the beginning. We need to talk about how patriarchal societies, and I'm going to speak specifically about Indian society and my personal experience within my own family now. When I talk about this, I'm not generalizing for the whole country. Every state in India is so different. It's almost like each state in India is a different country. They have their own cultural traditions. They have their own beliefs. But I'm talking about specifically where I'm from. South India, Tamil Nadu in particular, and Orthodox Hindu, specifically Brahmanism. That's my lived experience. And from what I saw, it controlled women through shame about bodies from day one. Now, let me paint you a picture of Orthodox South Indian culture around menstruation. So, in traditional Hindu communities, particularly among Brahmins and other Orthodox families. Now, when I talk about Brahmins, that's a whole other conversation around caste system. I will be doing an episode on that because I violently and rebuke anything that's related to the caste system. But our family has identified as being Brahmins as far as being Hindu. So when a girl gets her first period, she's not just given pads and a gentle explanation, as I see my sister-in-law do with my niece who's been raised here, as I see other friends prepare their child for. She's given a handbook of restrictions based on what's called ritual purity. So for 3 days every month, my mom told me that she was essentially ritually impure, not morally impure, but in a state that made you not suitable for sacred activities. So what are some of those sacred activities? You had to sleep separate from the family. There was a designated area, sometimes literally a separate room or an outhouse, as they called it, where menstruating women would stay. You couldn't cook because you might contaminate the food. You couldn't serve anyone. You couldn't touch anyone else's clothes while doing laundry. You definitely couldn't go to the temple. You couldn't participate in religious activities. You couldn't even touch the family deities or even the prayer room, or our homes had altars in them. You couldn't do any prayer in front of them. Some people, and within my family, made menstruating women eat in separate places, using separate bathrooms. Sounds like you're essentially being quarantined for being biologically female. Here's where it gets complex. This practice was often justified through multiple lenses, and some of these actually had legitimate foundations. And as I was preparing for this episode, I looked it up because I said it couldn't have been for bad intentions from, hundreds or thousands of years ago, since women have been having periods. And I wanted to find the root of why women were separated, or why there was this thing happening every time a woman got her period every month. The first thing is health and rest. And my mom does explain this too. Often within an Indian home, the woman is doing all the cooking, the cleaning, all of the caretaking within the home. And so having those 3 days, she said, it was nice. I just got to relax and not do anything. And somebody could come and bring me coffee. Somebody could come and bring me food, and I didn't have to clean. I could rest. And that was one of the original intentions that I found out was behind it. Life was physically demanding. And especially before modern conveniences. The break from cooking, as I mentioned, the heavy household duties, the physical labor could genuinely protect women from overexertion during menstruation when energy is naturally lower. If you have had your period, we're not saying anything that's against science. Our energy is naturally lower at that time. So there was also energy-based spiritual beliefs. So Ayurveda comes from India, and tantric tradition spoke of something called apanu vayu, and that downward flowing cleansing energy during menstruation. Now, if you follow Ayurveda and any tantric traditions or anything regarding yoga, they talk about energy flow and how certain poses are meant to bring the flow upwards through your chakras or bring them down to your lower chakras. So this apana vayu, this downward flowing cleansing energy, happens during menstruation. And the logic around this rest period was that engaging in rituals which draw energy upwards would disrupt this natural purification process. So it was a natural rest period to allow this downward energy that was happening for 3 days a month. Let's talk about some practical hygiene. Without modern sanitation, hygiene products, we didn't have, back in the day when my mom was growing up, and even before that now, there wasn't pads or tampons. They literally used a rag that they had to just keep washing over and over again. And seclusion might have genuinely reduced contamination in shared spaces and cooking areas. So there are religious texts. And if you go and look at any of the religious texts, there's the Dharma Shastras, and they said that this was a time of ritual impurity, as I mentioned before, that required purification through the Mangal Snanam bath after 3 days. So think about that, what I've just described. There's a built-in rest time for women who are taking charge of the household, especially the hard things around cleaning, cooking. And here there was this ritual built in that was honoring the woman, honoring the woman's rest, honoring the woman's use of her energy, and even just being able to have this purification bath after 3 days. Now let's talk about what has happened over the generations. these practical and spiritual foundations got distorted into rigid patriarchal control. Now, how often have we seen that happen? We see that happening in many countries now across the world, that things that are rooted in strong practical and spiritual foundations are slowly twisted into patriarchal control. So what was initially set aside as let her rest and honor her body's natural cleansing process became she's impure and untouchable. So spiritual rationale actually became a tool for excluding women and this, what I like to think of, social policing. And this language of ritual purity, because think about this, nowhere in here has a man had to go through this on a monthly basis, but this language of ritual purity created a hierarchy where menstruating women were treated as different from and less than the normal male state of being. Most, we talk about women weren't allowed to go to the temples. There weren't female priests at the temple. It was all male dominated. And these men were saying, well, you can't come into our temple. Over the centuries, the original health and spiritual basis got overshadowed by shame, stigma, control, and what may have started as a deep reverence for women's powerful biological process became a system for managing and diminishing that same power. So here's a distinction. If menstrual rest is framed as self-care, take 3 days to slow down, connect inward, honor your body's wisdom, that's super supportive, right? If we all could do that within our busy schedules, how amazing would that be? But when it's enforced with shame, isolation, and inequality, it clearly becomes patriarchal control, and it's disguised as tradition. When I would ask my family members about why do we have to do this, nobody had an explanation. Nobody had talked about Ayurveda. Nobody had talked about those other traditions that I talked about earlier. It was just, this is what you have to do. And as I talk about this, self-chosen rest equals empowerment, right? Forced segregation equals oppression. Now, the tragedy in this isn't what got passed down to young girls. Now, the sad thing is the message that was passed down to young girls wasn't, hey, your body is sacred and deserves rest. But it was, your body makes you unfit for normal life and requires purification to be acceptable again. Even when I went to India as an adult many years later, my mom specifically told me, she said, if you get your period, don't tell grandma. Don't tell her. And my grandma, I think she had a period radar because I had my period while I was visiting her. And I was having cramps, and she probably could see it on my face. She sat me down, looked me straight in the eyes, and said, do you have your menses? And I lied, and I said no, because I knew that I wouldn't be able to go in the kitchen and make my own coffee. I would feel bad for those 3 days. And if somebody were to come over, they knew that you had your period. The woman was out in another room, so they couldn't talk to you. And I just wasn't going to accept that, especially being raised in America. That message that I was indirectly being given was clear, that my body's natural process is shameful. It's dirty. That this bleeding that is happening is dirty. That it's shameful when you're bleeding. And that you need to be hidden, managed, and controlled, and set aside just for a few days so nobody ever finds out. Think about the profound irony of this. The same process that creates life, that literally continues the human species, was treated as contamination requiring purification rituals. The same blood that nourishes a growing baby in the womb was considered to be so spiritually disruptive that it couldn't be in the same room as religious items. Even if the original intention was about energy flow or providing rest, what survived in practice was shame. What got passed down to young girls wasn't your body is sacred and needs rest. It was your body makes you unfit. Here's what's more insidious. This wasn't presented as men's fear or arbitrary social control. It's presented as ancient wisdom. a spiritual law, a tradition that's connected us to our heritage. We were taught that accepting these restrictions was what made us good daughters, good Hindu women, spiritually aligned devotees. And the shame was sanctified. The segregation there was a spiritual basis around the segregation. And I want to talk about the shame and the secrecy that's around having your period. I had a cousin who was having severe postpartum depression every month, every time that she got her period. And we hear about this so often, and there's medication, there's supplements to really help you through that period. It's not uncommon to have postpartum depression. So, and I also want to share a story about the shame and the secrecy that's around having your period, or just even having premenstrual syndrome. I had a cousin that was having severe premenstrual syndrome every single month. And, the family was concerned, of course, and they took her to different doctors. And what it ultimately ended up being is what I said. It was premenstrual syndrome. And I think they got her on medication or gave her some supplements, and it started to get better. But as other family members found out about it, even coming to the U.S., the message was coming to the U.S. from different family members, there was so much shame. I remember talking about it, and I said, well, what's going on? And it was, do not talk about it. It was just like, do not talk about it. And as I got older, I asked, and I said, what, especially I asked my mother, because she was finding her voice. She said it was premenstrual syndrome. And I said, that's it. That's it. There was so much secrecy and shame behind that process. And even to today, I don't know if it's talked about. Just as women and growing up in this patriarchal society, or being from a culture that's very patriarchal, we're taught that you better be quiet, modest, and grateful for whatever space you're allowed to occupy. That's how I felt. It's the water we swim in. It's what gets internalized so deeply that we don't even recognize it as programming. We just think it's normal. We just think, oh, you have to do this, until, if you're lucky enough like me, you reach this perimenopause period and you're like, wait a second, I don't resonate with any of this. I appreciate my culture, but I don't resonate with any of this bullcrap that I was fed. So let's just talk about what patriarchal societies understand. Women are powerful. Biologically, spiritually, emotionally, we're designed to create, nurture, to transform. And systems built on domination and control and power can't survive if women are operating at full power. So these patriarchal societies, what I've found is they find ways to convince us that our power is actually our weakness. So this is my perspective. Within my culture, this looked like the concept of the ideal woman. Someone who speaks softly, never raises her voice, always defers to male authority, someone who finds fulfillment through service to others, never gets through her own ambitions. This is suffering in silence. The stories we tell about women who endure abuse, neglect, or mistreatment without complaint, and how that makes them noble and blessed, or this is just their karma. I heard that within my family as well, and with family members who were suffering in silence, and other people, family members were saying, how can we help this person? And what they got was, well, this is their karma. So this constant messaging that a woman's worth is tied to her relationships, daughter, wife, mother, never to her individual identity or achievements. The way women who spoke up, who had opinions, who took space were labeled as difficult, selfish, not marriage material. And this conditioning starts really early. Little girls are praised for being quiet, for not causing trouble, for being mature for their age. And that usually means suppressing their natural expression to make adults comfortable. We are taught that our voices should be soft, our opinions should be gentle, don't rock the boat, our needs should come last. And we learn to read rooms obsessively, to know exactly how small we need to be to make ourselves acceptable in that space, constantly looking at other people's eyes, their facial expressions. So do you know what this does to us? By the time we reach adulthood, most of us have no idea what our authentic voice even sounds like. We've become so skilled at modulating ourselves for other people's comfort that we've lost access to our own truth. We downplay our achievements, ask for permission for things that really are our right. And we say sorry when other people bump into us. And when you do this over a long time, when this happens over a long period of time, especially when you're going back generations and it's carried down generation to generation, culturally, societally, we start to internalize the message that being a woman means we need to be managed. We need to be quiet. We need to be small. And in extreme viewpoints, that we're actually an inconvenience. And our biology becomes part of this silencing. Taught to hide our periods, never let anyone know it's that time of the month, push through pain and discomfort because that's just part of being a woman. Back to the PMS, told that PMS makes us crazy or irrational. So if we're upset about something during that time, it's not because we have legitimate concerns, it's because we're hormonal. Or as I had other males say, oh, you must be on your period or on the rag. Our emotional responses to injustice, our intuitive knowing about dangerous situations, righteous anger about being mistreated, and all of this gets dismissed as women being emotional. And the cruelest part, we start to believe it. We start to question our own perceptions. We start to think that, yeah, maybe I'm too emotional. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Start to think that, oh boy, my period's coming. Here it comes again. Then something magical happens. Something that's patriarchal systems have never accounted for. And something that is not spoken about too much in Indian society, let alone my South Indian culture. Menopause. Menopause changes everything. See, for decades, women's bodies have been in service. Every month we bleed. Every month our bodies prepare for possibility of creating life. Our hormones fluctuate in this beautiful rhythm that nature's created, or that's designed around fertility. And as I said, the society has used this rhythm to control us. So she's just PMSing. She's just being hormonal. Wait until after her period to have that conversation. You're at work and somebody snips at you, or your boss is mad about something. Oh, she must be on her period. But what do we say to the guy when they're in a bad mood, when they're emotional, when they're irrational? Nothing. Our natural cycles become a weapon used against our credibility. Then you enter perimenopause, and suddenly your body starts performing its primary function. You start getting a period maybe once every 3 months. Maybe it's less than that. And you're no longer fertile. You're no longer cycling through those hormonal fluctuations that made you irrational. And instead of becoming less powerful, you become more powerful. Here's what nobody tells you about perimenopause and menopause. It's not just the end of fertility. It's the beginning of a completely different relationship with your own power. And when your body stops bleeding, guess what? It stops apologizing. When your hormones shift, they shift towards clarity, truth-telling, and towards an intolerance for BS that you've never experienced before. And you start to actually say, oh my God, how did I tolerate that in the past? And I've talked about what happens biologically once you start entering perimenopause. You have the decreased estrogen, and there's less people-pleasing behavior with that. Estrogen is literally the hormone that makes you more agreeable, more focused on maintaining harmony. And when it drops, so does the tolerance for keeping the peace at our own expense. There's changes in brain chemistry that start to help you prioritize yourself rather than being the nice girl. And you start valuing yourself more. You start valuing your own needs more. And there's a shift in energy from an external focus to an internal focus. For decades, think about it. Got my period at 12. And started going into menopause around 45. For all those years, my body was primed to take care of others. And now it's starting to get primed to take care of for myself. And that's just the physical changes that happen. The psychological changes are even more dramatic. You stop caring what other people think as much. You know, the opinions that once felt like life or death, and you were calling your friend because somebody said something about you and it was just so devastating. It's not important. It's irrelevant. And you start to see clearly how much energy you've been giving away to people and situations that do not deserve it. You start to develop something what I like to call menopause clarity, the ability to see through BS, manipulation, social pleasantries, to see what's actually happening. So you get this, people talk about the third eye, and that's your clarity, that's your intuition, that's your vision, that's your knowing. Well, you get this extra menopause clarity as you know, especially for women, we move through this period where we can see clearly, where we just know, and we're not going to put up with it anymore. And you start to feel angry about the things that you've been accepting for decades. Instead of suppressing that anger, you start to trust it as information. And a friend was talking to me yesterday about Christian Northrup, and she does a lot of work around women and supporting them through menopause. And one of the ways to really, really heal the trauma, all these years of being suppressed, is righteous indignation. It's actually being angry at the system. Angry. That's why I'm doing this episode. I was angry once I started to just think about having my period and where it came from and going to India and how horrible it felt. God forbid I was in India and for longer than a month and I got my period twice. That was 2 doses of feeling horrible. And so I feel that righteous indignation. I feel angry towards the systems that have tried to control us, that have tried to make us small, that have tried to make us feel that we're not good enough, we're not worthy enough. You might notice that you've started speaking up in ways that you never did before. And you're setting boundaries, and that actually feels harsh to people because you never set boundaries with them before. You leave relationships, marriages, long-term partnerships that stopped serving you a long time ago. Start new careers, new adventures, new versions of yourselves. You're refusing to manage other people's emotions. You just get to say no without an elaborate explanation. Just saying, no, I don't want to. And it's not that perimenopause or menopause makes women crazy or difficult. It just gives us permission to be authentic, to be ourselves. Just think about that. When your body just is stopping this biological function that it's done its whole life, you finally get to discover who you are outside of that. So let's talk about what this means. Let's talk about how to see menopause as liberation, not as a loss. Let's first start by reclaiming our biological story. Your period was never dirty. The cultures that taught you it was shameful were afraid of your power to create life, so they convinced you that this power made you impure. It was meant to keep you small. Your emotions during PMS weren't crazy. They weren't irrational. It was your intuitive knowing breaking through the conditioning that taught you to accept unacceptable things. Your hormones were literally lowering your tolerance for BS, and instead of honoring that as wisdom, you were taught to either medicate it away or go hide for a few days until you got yourself in check. Menopause, as I've said before, is not a failure or an ending. It's a graduation. It's your body saying, you've spent decades serving everyone else, now it's time to serve yourself. So let's talk about how to work with your changes that are happening during perimenopause and menopause instead of working against them. When you feel that new intolerance for BS, honor it. That's not you becoming bitter. That's you becoming wise. That's the wisdom in you stepping up. Your body, your soul, your mind is finally giving you permission to do things that enhance your life force, not drain you. When you feel less concerned with other people's approval, celebrate it. Celebrate it. It's not you becoming selfish. And let's talk about the word selfish. Why can't you become selfish? If you're putting yourself first, yeah. If I'm putting myself first on a daily basis, yeah, I am selfish. I still care for others. I still have a service mindset when it comes to work. But I am going to put myself first. And when you feel angry about things you've been tolerating, trust it. There's a grief process that happens. And I was looking through the stages of grief yesterday because something has come to the surface and that's made me angry. And I realized I was going through that again in a different way. Feel that anger. Allow yourself to step into that righteous indignation. If this is a system that's kept us down, trust that anger. That anger isn't destructive. It's informative. It's showing you something. It's showing you where you've abandoned yourself. And the only reason you're angry is because you realize you don't want to abandon yourself anymore. And how could you have abandoned yourself in the past? You don't know what you know until you know it. So don't be too hard on yourself, but trust that anger. When you feel that urge to speak your truth, do it. Do it. You've got nothing to lose. Your voice has been silenced long enough, and the world needs to know what you have to say. Here's what I want you to understand about this phase of life. It's not the beginning of your decline. It's the beginning of standing in your sovereignty, meaning you are independent, sovereign being, not controlled by any systems, viewpoints. You get to decide what you believe. You get to decide how you want to live. You get to decide your perspective of the world and live from that place. You're becoming more and more authentic every day. And you're not losing your femininity. I've heard so many women that I've been around who went through menopause saying, oh, my skin got saggy. Oh, they talked about it as a loss of femininity. And it's not that. I actually have stepped into this more feminine version of myself every year that I've been in menopause. You find out what it means to be feminine when you're not performing for patriarchal approval. Think about the women in your life who are postmenopausal. The ones who seem to have this clarity, directness, intolerance for nonsense that might have shocked you when you were younger. Like I said, my mom is the biggest, example of this for me. As I was younger and she was in her 40s going through perimenopause, I noticed every day was an argument with my dad. And I used to think, why is she starting fights? She wasn't starting fights. There was things that happened within the family dynamic, not with my dad, but within the family dynamic that my mom, that was unjust, that was unfair. And my mom was finally finding her voice in those things and expressing her anger towards it. It was righteous indignation towards this patriarchal system that had kept her small. She started to find herself. And a few years later, all of a sudden, she was a Montessori teacher and helping children to find their voice. This is your permission slip. You don't need permission, but it's your permission slip to stop managing other people's emotions, speak your truth, even when it makes others uncomfortable, prioritize your own needs without guilt, take up space, be angry without justification, and permission to change your mind about anything you want to. Permission to change your viewpoint, permission to change anything that you desire. Your body is literally rewiring itself to support this. Your hormones are shifting to put you first. And your biology is rebelling against decades of conditioning. I've talked about the ripple effect too. So this is the beautiful thing about women who claim this postmenopausal power. And even if you're in perimenopause, you're already going through it. Gives you permission to every other woman around you to do the same. People might actually start commenting, wow, you just say what you mean. Wow, it's unbelievable. You also might find resistance towards it. Oh, she's changed. I had a client the other day just say that she got a call from somebody in her family saying, oh, we were just talking about you, how you've changed. Rather than getting offended at it, I told her to tell them, thank you for noticing. Yeah, I have changed because I'm not taking your BS anymore. You will get those comments, and you'll also notice when you're not being heard. Today, I took my car in to a tire place because the tire pressure sensor is off. I had pulled over before I went to the tire place, checked the tire pressure because it was so low that I didn't want to drive on the flat, and the tire pressure was fine, so I knew it was a sensor. I took it there. I told them. They told me no. They filled it up with air. They said, the light's gone off. You're good. I said, no, it's the tire pressure sensor. Drove around. It came back. The light came back on again. I said, it's the sensor. I said, it says it's 65. The tire pressure is 65. They said, no, it's not. I was like, you want to get in the car? So something that could have taken 15 minutes took an hour and 15 minutes because these people, men, weren't willing to listen to me. For whatever reason, I had no credibility about my tire pressure sensor. And you might notice this and you get sensitive to it and you might get angry about it. I was angry afterwards and got in the car, talked to a friend, cursed for a few seconds, and I got it out of my system. So like I said, you might start to notice that these things are happening more often. When you stop apologizing, you're showing your daughters, your nieces that having the space is their birthright. I don't have my own children, but I have a niece who is my mini-me. We get to have such deep conversations. We were talking about being Indian and how it is to be a younger Indian woman. And she said she didn't really identify with it as much because it wasn't really enforced in the house. She's so disconnected to it. We had two very different experiences growing up. And now she's trying to reconnect to that part of her culture, the language especially, because to have that connection, that cultural connection. But she gets to rebuke the things that don't serve her. When you speak your truth despite the discomfort, you're normalizing being authentic for others. And you're prioritizing yourself. You really are breaking generations and a generational pattern of women sacrificing themselves, especially for other people's benefit. This is how we heal the patriarchal conditioning, not just for ourselves, but for the generations who are coming after us. You stop participating in our own silence. You speak up when you go get your tire fixed. Stop teaching daughters, nieces, the other female figures in your life to be small. And you start really encouraging every female in your life to be themselves and to really put themselves first. And when we start showing these women what it looks like when a woman is fully alive, fully authentic, fully unapologetic about taking up the space and being who they are, the culture that taught you that your period was shameful, guess what? We get to show these women in our lives what it looks like when a woman is fully alive, fully authentic, living from their life force, living a life from their worldview and perspective, and fully unapologetic about being them. And to my culture that taught me that my period was shameful and gross and I had to go into hiding, that same culture that needed me to be small and quiet as I age, well, that's disappearing gracefully. And each person that stands up to that breaks that system down more and more. Your biology has other plans. If you haven't had children, it's okay. I thought I was going into perimenopause and I didn't have children and that was the end of me. But my biology had other plans. It was preparing me for the most powerful phase, the second act of my life, which nobody could have told me about. It's the phase where I get to finally discover who I am. I get to live from me. I get to live from my soul. This is your time. This is your permission slip. And this is your biological rebellion. So if you're watching this and you are in perimenopause or menopause and you resonate with what I spoke about, especially being Indian, South Indian, and how we were raised to think about our periods, guess what? You're becoming free. Nothing's wrong with you. And if you're younger and watching this, I want you to understand this is your future. This is where you get to be fully authentic and fully step into your power. So here's your practice for this week. Pay attention to what your body is telling you. What are you tolerating that you don't want to tolerate anymore? Where are you putting other people above yourself, even though you're cringe inside? What would you say if you knew no one would be upset by your honesty? And if you're ready to dive deeper into this work, you can grab my link below and grab my free training, 4 Steps to Finding Your Voice in Relationships. And if you click on that link, you can apply for a free 20-minute coaching call. And we get to really dive into this deeper. Before I go, I'd love to hear from you. How is your relationship with your body, with yourself, changed as you've gotten older? What truths are you finally ready to speak? Share it in the comments. Because when you share, you give other people the permission to share. I love you. I see you. And I believe in your right to be who you really are at your soul level. And that patriarchal system that has spent decades convincing you that your biology is your enemy. It's about to learn what happens when women stop apologizing for being alive. Welcome to your rebellion.